Welcome to Wilder Wolves Hall of Fame Mode Fandom. My name is Wilder Adams, and in today's episode, we are going to reflect on the Karl-Anthony Towns trade because KAT just made the NBA Finals. And I know us as Timberwolves fans, we are so thrilled for this dude who was one of the most loyal Timberwolves of all time. He repped our jerseys, he gave us everything he had, and he went through so much nonsense in terms of the hatred and criticism he received. And now he's in the NBA Finals. He's made the conference finals 3 times before Joel Embiid has made it once. And it's really great to give KAT his flowers in this episode, but also just look back on the trade and consider all the layers for why Karl-Anthony Towns was traded, because it's already a day after the Knicks made the NBA Finals. We have Kendrick Perkins on First Take talking about the KAT trade being one of the worst in NBA history. So Perkins does that a lot, by the way. He did it with the Rudy Gobert trade, did it with the KAT trade. It's kind of a perennial thing with Kendrick Perkins. So we're just going to break this down, consider all the weeds, all the layers of that trade, so we can get a full picture and decide whether the trade was worth it for Minnesota or not. And also, we're going to give Karl-Anthony Towns his flowers because he deserves it. Before we get started in today's show, I am so thrilled to tell you guys about the first ever Wilder Wolves podcast sponsor, 612 Tees. 612 offers a wide range of uniquely designed Minnesota sports tees, and you can see these awesome Timberwolves options right here. Because I am chronically online, the one that resonates with me is the Wizard of Nas t-shirt, because I've spent a lot of time making memes, and I once made a Wizard of Nas meme, so it comes to life in this t-shirt, and I am definitely going to buy one. But there's not only Timberwolves tees here, because you can look up here. There's a ton of different sports. You can also get crew necks, accessories, etc. There's a lot of Nas Reed agenda right here, and we always promote a Nas Reed agenda on Wilder Wolves. And then you see this really sick Justin Jefferson crew neck. Use the code Wilder25 to get 25% off your first purchase. It's a great way to support a small business, and it also helps this show out quite a bit, so definitely check them out. I just want to start out by just giving KAT credit because he's having an unbelievable playoff run, period. He's a leader in rebounds and assists this postseason right now. Karl-Anthony Towns, in terms of box plus minus, is having the 11th greatest postseason run in NBA history right now. And notable names that he is behind: LeBron James, Nikola Jokic, Michael Jordan, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Karl-Anthony Towns is just behind those guys, which is so telling on how incredible he's been this postseason. Shooting nearly 50% from three, over 50% from the field, 90% on the line. The Knicks, they're having just one of the most dominant playoff runs we've seen. I believe this is the first time since 2017 that a team got a plus minus of 200 or better in the speed in which they did it. So they're just obliterating teams right now, consistently blowing them out. They've had a double-digit win streak this postseason, and Karl-Anthony Towns analytically has been the most efficient player on that team. So that is incredible for him, and that is great. And I know as we're talking about this, I know some of us are kind of like, our faces are getting red and just getting frustrated, like, oh my gosh, another Minnesota star. They leave Minnesota and they go somewhere else and make the finals, right? I mean, Jimmy Butler, Karl-Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins, Kevin Garnett, Sam Cassell, Kevin Love. The names go on and on and on. And in football, Sam Darnold going to the Seattle Seahawks, winning a Super Bowl. It's exhausting. I get it. But I do think that we need to take a step back and view this trade for what it was at the time, because timing and context is so incredibly critical with this trade. First of all, this is when the CBA really just started kicking in around this stretch. And this is really important for those who maybe don't know a ton about this new CBA. The second apron on the CBA is hell. Basically, if you spend a certain amount of money, your roster flexibility is so incredibly finite. For example, if you are over the second apron, you can't make trades that aren't equal swaps. What I mean by that is you have to do a 1-for-1, 2-for-2, 2-for-3. You can't give up more players, and you can't take back less players. Like, the amount of players on one team has to be the same as your team as you're making a trade. So that's difficult. Number two, you can't take back more money. Number three, in free agency, there is no exceptions. There's no biannual exception. There's no mid-level exception. You're kind of reliant on veteran minimums in free agency. And another interesting wrinkle in the second apron If you are over the second apron in 3 years of a 5-year period, your next first round pick automatically sinks to the 30th pick or as far low as you possibly can go. And as we know with the Timberwolves, this team does not have a lot of picks in the near future. So you kind of cherish every pick you have. And of course, you want to have the 30th pick. You want to win a title. But if Minnesota is the 6th seed, like they were this year, like they were the year before, sinking to 30 without any sort of trade, that's a disaster. That's a disaster. So the amount of flexibility you have when you have a really expensive roster is so limited. It's basically a few expensive contracts, a lot of minimums, and a lot of rookie contracts. And that's how you build a team in the NBA that is becoming much more depth dependent than it was like 10 years ago. So keeping Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, Anthony Edwards, and the rest of the crew in the second apron was frankly not a second option, or was frankly not an option. So I think that's really important to think about. And also at the time of the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, he was coming off of a summer in which the Timberwolves made their first conference finals, and that was great, right? They played the Dallas Mavericks, and KAT had a horrible series. He had a terrible series. He shot below 40% from the field, below 25% from three, turnovers, fouls. He had his worst series of his career. And as we know with young Karl-Anthony Towns, that says a lot because KAT's had some really bad series. And it's funny thinking about this now in hindsight, but at that time, the national media consensus was Karl-Anthony Towns isn't dependable enough to be a second option, which is hilarious now because KAT has played some of the most composed basketball that we've seen this postseason. But that's been the truth, and it's still a looming question with KAT going forward. So Minnesota, when they made so the options with Minnesota were essentially you keep all three guys, which is not really an option. Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert on a max contract, KAT on a super max, and let Naz Reid, Nikhil, and all those guys walk. Or it was you trade one of Rudy Gobert, one of Karl-Anthony Towns, you get some flexibility back, and then you have room to extend a Naz Reid, extend somebody else, stay below the second apron, and maintain some flexibility. Those were the options. And Minnesota at that phase, it was the right move to deal one of Karl-Anthony Towns or Rudy Gobert. Now, the question now we can get into is, should have Minnesota dealt Rudy Gobert over Karl-Anthony Towns? And like I said, the context of KAT coming off of another really underwhelming playoff series, I think had weight there. And Rudy Gobert was the fabric of a team that was a number 1 seed in the Western Conference. They were number 3 seed, but they were the number 1 seed most of the year. They were the number 1 defense with Rudy Gobert, and he was the anchor of that team. He was the defensive player of the year. So Minnesota, whatever proposition you made, whether you traded KAT or Rudy, there was risk. Of course, if you believe Karl-Anthony Towns was a true second option and eventually he would get there like it looks like right now, that's a really tough player to give up in a trade when there aren't a lot of efficient, reliable second options who can play off your main star, which Karl-Anthony Towns can do. He did it with Anthony Edwards, did it with Jalen Brunson, but also we've seen the defense on this roster when Rudy Gobert is off the basketball court, and that's terrifying. We've seen it with KAT and Naz at times. We saw it with Randle and Naz. The front court defense falls apart regardless of which player it is, as long as Rudy Gobert is off the basketball court. So Rudy Gobert was coming off of a time when his value and his stock was so high, and KAT was coming off at a time when there were so many questions about his floor and ceiling as a player. And they did a trade, guys, where they got Julius Randle, they got Donte DiVincenzo, they got pick 17, which turned into Johan Beringer. And as much as we've criticized Randle on this show, he had 2 effective seasons for the most part until the playoffs. Randle got to the conference finals that first year, and he's done some good things. To me, it's pretty clear that you can't keep Randle long-term anymore, but he's done some good things. Donte DiVincenzo, you don't get that type of connective player if you keep KAT. Johan Beringer, I think we all are so incredibly high on him. I especially am. I think the dude with proper development could become an absolute stud in the NBA, and he was supposed to be a lottery pick, and he fell to Minnesota. So I think I feel good about the value of the trade in which Minnesota traded KAT for. considering where his stock was at the time. So long story short, I'm not upset that Minnesota traded Karl-Anthony Towns at that time, and the package was pretty fine. And Minnesota's gotten out of the first round in both years since KAT has left. Of course, the Knicks make the finals. And like I said, Karl-Anthony Towns, absolute machine in the Eastern Conference, a weaker Eastern Conference, but KAT does deserve credit for outplaying Embiid, outplaying Mobley and Allen. All that is absolutely true. So there's a there's a lot of layers into the trade. That first couple layers, right? Is it whether you trade KAT or Rudy, and whether you believe that they should have kept KAT or they should have kept Rudy? There's another element to this for those who believe KAT was the one they should have kept regardless. Because when Minnesota made the Rudy Gobert trade in 2022, nobody really knew what the next CBA would look like. So Minnesota wasn't making trades preparing for this next CBA to be as strict as it was. I believe, and I haven't talked to anybody on this or anything like that, but my belief is if Minnesota knew about the intensity and how strict this next CBA was going to be, I don't think they make the Rudy Gobert trade because there's extra value in this new CBA and having good contracts, good flexibility, good young players, right? In Minnesota, they gave up a lot of picks. They gave up Walker Kessler, Beasley, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't believe they would have made the Rudy Gobert trade if it wasn't for this new CBA. If they thought it was something else, they would have probably never made the trade in the first place. So I don't think this is a get really mad at Tim Connolly for his massive miscalculation. I think Connolly just looked at the environment of the NBA at that time and just said, this is our move. And look, Minnesota has made it out of the second round for 3 straight years. They made 2 conference finals. The Rudy Gobert trade, for the most part, has been success. So as much as it can be frustrating to watch KAT go to the NBA finals and Minnesota not, and how bad the media might frame this, I can't get too mad at Minnesota for with the cards they were given on how they operated, because they made moves that were pretty good. And at the time in which they traded KAT, it kind of felt like they got more value out of him than we expected. Because another fear on that trade at the time was if you wait another year and KAT doesn't have a good year, that KAT would have been a massive negative asset. And then Minnesota would be stuck. They might have to keep KAT and Rudy and Ant and then have no ability to build around the Anthony Edwards core. So that was a massive fear. So Minnesota, I don't think they expected to trade KAT because they did it right before training camp. But once they got Donte DiVincenzo, they were like, look, this is the move in which we're still good. We have flexibility and we can figure stuff out. And now Minnesota does have that flexibility. Anthony Edwards, of course, is on his Supermax contract, but you have Naz Reid, Jaden McDaniels, Rudy Gobert, Julius Randle on around that $25 to $35 million contract range. So now what's going to happen, because Minnesota is at this spot where they can't stay the same, right? I think a big part of this KAT trade now is going to be about Minnesota's next move, because the winning plus flexibility, those are wins. Those are well executed by the Minnesota Timberwolves. So now it's what can you do with that flexibility? Can you get good value out of Julius Randle and or Rudy Gobert? And can you get the star power next to Anthony Edwards to hopefully transcend this team to the next level, whether it's a Kyrie Irving, Kawhi Leonard, or whether it's Ja Morant or whoever it is, whatever player Minnesota trades for, and it doesn't even have to be a star, just Minnesota's next moves, I think, is going to be a big part on the evaluation of the Karl-Anthony Towns move, because flexibility means I can make more moves and not be, back against the wall. So now for me, for Minnesota, I'm just going to be very curious to see what is Minnesota's next move to make sure that they didn't make a mistake on the KAT trade. And in another aspect of this, because I'm talking about it like we thought at the time KAT might not be a second option, and that made sense to deal him if you don't think he's a second option, and Rudy Gobert was the fabric of that defense. All that was true. But if Karl-Anthony Towns plays against the San Antonio Spurs with Wemby or the physical rim protection of Oklahoma City, and he has a strong series and he wins an NBA Finals for the city of New York, to me, that would answer our question on whether Minnesota won or lost the trade, or if they should have dealt KAT or Rudy. Because if KAT can withstand the front courts of Oklahoma City and San Antonio, he would answer all the questions I've had about KAT over the years. And that's a pretty big mountain to climb still, because the Eastern Conference isn't as nearly good as the Western Conference, right? Of course, they went through Embiid, they went through Mobley and Allen. That's great. But New York was obliterating these teams so much. A lot of these games were over early. And when I see KAT become this incredibly composed and efficient decision maker as a shooter, as a playmaker, I give him a ton of credit for that because he's reaching a new level in those aspects. But we also need to remember a big question with KAT was, can KAT, when everything gets really hard in the playoffs, stay grounded enough to still be effective? Because multiple occasions in the past, the answer was no with KAT. And the Knicks, because they've been dominating everybody by such a massive disparity, it's easy to be an efficient decision maker. It's easy to just be calm when you're up. But when it gets hard against San Antonio or Oklahoma City, how does KAT operate? That's going to be a major question. If KAT can win a championship in New York and his efficiency is great and they face all of these high leverage, high adversity moments against a team with superior physicality and length in the front court, both San Antonio and Oklahoma City are like that, then you could say, all right, Minnesota did lose this trade. It doesn't mean Minnesota can't come back from the KAT trade because, like I said, the next move is going to be so critical for Minnesota now. But I still question whether Karl-Anthony Towns, when everything gets really hard, if he can maintain this level of efficiency that we've seen throughout this postseason. Because in the past, we've seen KAT get riled up. We've seen KAT get into foul trouble and kind of take himself out of a game in a highly physical, high leverage moment. There hasn't been a lot of leverage moments for New York. New York has straight up obliterated everybody they've played this postseason. So it's not the same as if you're going through a highly difficult second round conference finals against Wemby or the Thunder, in which we know the talent disparity in the West and East is significant. So that's going to be the question with KAT. Long story short, the jury's still out for me. I think that if you believe that KAT should have been kept because he made the finals, I don't think that's a bad take. Same thing with the Rudy Gobert thing. For me, there's a lot of unanswered questions. If KAT wins the finals and does all the things that I question him doing, then the answer is you should have kept KAT because he answered all of those questions. I still have my doubts on how New York is going to match up with Oklahoma City or San Antonio unless one of those teams walk into the finals just too beaten up. If that's what happens, it is what it is. But I'm proud of KAT. I'm proud of KAT. And all these questions I have, I still think he was so incredibly mislabeled as a losing player over the years that I'm just glad he's proving that's never been the case, right? I mean, some of these guys like, Embiid or Paul George or Dame, all these guys who people always viewed as a layer above in terms of winning tendencies, KAT's had more winning success than all of them. So that is such an incredible reality with KAT, and I'm proud of him. And I think a lot of things can be true with KAT. I think that you can be proud of KAT and say he's proven a lot of haters wrong, and that there's, he's taken a big step that a lot of people didn't believe he could take. I still think it's fair to question if KAT can get the job done against some of these juggernauts in the Western Conference. I think we'll see that obviously in the NBA Finals. And I also believe that you can't get too mad at Minnesota for their false processing. I don't believe they would have traded for Karl-Anthony, or I don't believe Minnesota would have traded for Rudy Gobert if they knew this new CBA would be this strict. And also, it makes a lot of sense to me why they kept Rudy over KAT when we already questioned if KAT was a second option for very valid reasons in that conference finals, and Rudy Gobert was the anchor of a number one defense in the NBA. I think there's a lot of parts of this, but it's going to be really fascinating to see just how the season ends. And I asked you guys on X, should the Wolves regret trading KAT? And I really like the variety of answers that you guys gave because it's so layered to me, right? It's so layered to me. And I thought this comment stood out to me. I always had the belief that if Ant didn't develop a lob pass and better chemistry with Rudy, that I'd pick KAT over Rudy and wouldn't think twice. And I think this take has a ton of merit in hindsight, right? Because we saw Rudy against OKC last year, San Antonio, and that playmaking chemistry between Minnesota's backcourt and Rudy has never developed. And it makes Rudy Gobert's offensive limitations shine to a level that seems like will never be overcome against San Antonio, against Oklahoma City. So now we're already questioning, is Rudy Gobert a long-term fit on this roster? And even though KAT, I have questions with against OKC and San Antonio still, and we'll see those questions answered in the finals, I think this is a very fair point still. And I've seen multiple people talk about they should regret the return. And guys, I mean, I still really like you on Beringer. Donte DiVincenzo was a really good asset. Julius Randle still did some good things over the last 2 years in Minnesota. It's clear that Minnesota needs to pivot again, but they had the flexibility to, which is partially why they made the KAT trade. So I slightly disagree. I think they got a good return. I just think it was an imperfect circumstance. But like a lot of people, I agree that Minnesota, super happy for KAT, but the cap situation just forced KAT out of the playoffs or out of Minnesota. And I don't think Minnesota ever wanted to get rid of KAT, but that was just the harsh reality with the KAT thing. So, I think that the Karl-Anthony Towns ending in Minnesota was pretty unfortunate because, of course, we wanted KAT to stay in Minnesota forever. And I don't think Minnesota could have foresaw the CBA looking as difficult as it did. But I still think Minnesota has an opportunity to make this trade work out for all parties. But the key for Minnesota, you can't think about KAT. The KAT trade's done. It's over. Whether KAT wins the finals or not, that'd be great for him if he does. But Minnesota, to justify the value of the trade, was the flexibility they received. And flexibility gives you options to make more moves. So Minnesota this offseason, they're in a spot where the urgency is clearly higher than it's been the last couple of years. We've had Anthony Edwards press conferences, him kind of saying no comment on what needs to be done, maybe implying this roster just not as good as the Spurs. He literally said they're the better team. And then you also think about Tim Connolly, his post-game interviews, they felt different than other years as well because he was talking about OKC's not settling, the Spurs aren't settling, we won't either. Minnesota seems more urgent to make a move this summer than the last couple summers. So I think something's going to get done eventually. And now the question is, does the next trade work for Minnesota? And if the next trade works for Minnesota, then it works out for all parties because you kept Nas, who I really like. I think Beringer could be a great piece. If Beringer develops, that will be a part of the KAT trade worth considering. There's a lot of layers here. And I'm so proud and happy of KAT for just getting to the stage that he's in right now, proving all the haters wrong, making the finals. And, KAT still has some questions for me that make me question whether he's going to win a championship against the Thunder or Spurs. But I'm more than excited to watch it. And thank you guys all so much for listening to this episode. It's been a blast just continuing to pump out Timberwolves content. There's so much more, and stay tuned for following episodes. A lot of offseason speculation we're going to tap into. Thank you all so much. This is Wilder Wolves Hall of Fame Mode Fandom.